Are you someone who is searching for purpose? Are you someone who is looking for your life to have meaning? Or are you someone who already feels like you have a purpose, or you're already in your purpose? Versus a calling. Are you someone who has a calling that is bigger than yourself? And you know that this is something so much bigger. Is there a difference between having a calling and a purpose? This is what we're going to yarn about today, and I'm going to break them down through the principles of mana, which is a Māori principle and practice and spirituality, and First Nations Indigenous dreaming, and share and how they've woven through my life and how they've shown up in my experience. And there is a difference between purpose. Purpose is the foundations of who you are. It's what lights you up. It's what gives you energy. And it's not necessarily something that you need to find. It's about, and it's not about becoming, it's about being. It's about reclamation and remembering. Because here's the thing, the things that light you up, the things that set your heart on fire, the things that compel you and are just the way you move through the world, your gifts, the things that come so naturally to you that other people go, how do you do that? Or I could never do that. And you just go, what? It's easy. The things that are simple to you and almost seem not that big of a deal, or they're just like, you get confused when people speak to you about that. Those are your gifts. Those are your strengths. And sometimes those are your purpose. Your purpose is the foundations for why you show up in the world, how you show up. A calling is a compulsion, is something that compels you and speaks to you. And sometimes a calling is for a season. It's a thing that you are called to do, a thing you are called to be, a situation, a moment. Versus purpose is the foundations for your life. And this is what I want to yarn with you about today. If you're new here, my name is Shantelle Thompson, and this is Warrior Heart Yarns with Auntie Shan. The reason it's Auntie Shan is because in our culture, the yarns with our aunties and our elders are the things that ground us through their journey, through their wisdom, through them holding space for us, through both their example, but also through their wisdom, their sharing, and the space that they create for us to learn from those who have come before us, the wisdom of our elders and our leaders. And you have different types of aunties. You have the aunties that tell you the truth. You have the aunties that hold the space for you, but that while holding you accountable and creating love for you. And you have the aunties that are just staunch as anything. So there's many different types of aunties, and that's why this speaks to me. And the warrior heart is for those that have been told that they are too much or not enough in the world, or they've had to bury parts of themselves because they have not been allowed, or it wasn't safe to be themselves in the world, and they had to bury or forget parts of themselves in order to survive. And this is for those that have been called to wake up, that are being called to come home to themselves and not become someone new, but to go on that journey of reclamation and remembering of who they always were, who they always have been. And it's about having the courage to follow that calling. And for some, that could be your purpose, is that your purpose is to become yourself, is to know yourself, and then to develop the courage and the strength to be yourself and only yourself in the world, nothing less, but nothing more than who you are. And this is where the principles of mana and dreaming come in. And this has come through in my journey in many different ways. The world tried to write my story for me before I was even born. And my journey has been one of self-authorship, grounded in culture, ancestrally guided and dreaming led. My story is not one that was born from deficit and trauma. My strength and my power was not born out of my pain and my trauma. These were things that were always mine. They might have been shaped and influenced by the adversity and the trauma that I have experienced, but they were not born from it. My dreaming, my power, and my strength as a woman, as a mother, as an Indigenous woman, as the Barkindji Warrior, were seated in the womb of my ancestors long before I was born into this world. And my story is defined through the Indigenous and matriarchal lens of being a powerful First Nations woman, not the colonial narrative of being a victim, of being colonized. These are both true, and yet my story is told and seeded through my power and my purpose, not through my trauma and my adversity. These are things that I have experienced, but they were not the seeds of why I became and how I became the Barkindji Warrior. This yarn is important because so many people are in this season are looking for purpose, looking for meaning. And I know from personal experience that in the seasons when my purpose and my calling have been clear to me and I've had the courage to follow them, that my calling and my purpose were bigger than myself. It was the way that I was able to overcome the hardships that I was facing in the season. But it wasn't just about having a calling that was bigger than myself, a calling and a dreaming that was in service of others. It also had to be in service of who I was at the time. And there also had to be a belief, not just in myself, but in my ability to be the person who could do the thing. And then there was also the foundations of being worthy of that dreaming and that calling. Being worthy of being someone who was alive and allowed to be myself in the world when so many messages had told me I wasn't good enough, I wasn't allowed, it wasn't safe. I didn't have permission to be myself in the world. And even today, who is Shantelle without all the titles is something that I'm asking myself on a consistent basis, to strip away the layers of conditioning, to strip away the layers of trauma, both within my own mindset and the internalization of these deficit narratives and what I made things mean, what stories I made up, over what is my truth at a soul level, at a spirit level. And these answers can be scary. Going on this journey, once you say yes and you open the door, there is no going back. Because once we say yes and we start searching, and sometimes it isn't just about searching, sometimes it's about creating space so our purpose and our calling can find us. So let's get into this a little bit deeper around what is a calling versus a purpose. So for me, calling and purpose come under dreaming and mana. So mana is a Māori concept, and I want to acknowledge and give gratitude to the Māori brothers and sisters that I've connected with over the last 5 years, and that have this calling and this compulsion to understand my own journey through another Indigenous culture when I don't know how to access that knowledge in my own culture. So I want to acknowledge that I am not Māori, and learning this Māori concept of mana is allowing me to better understand my own journey, because I don't know where to access Barkindji or First Nations teachings around what I understand and what I'm learning about mana being the internal journey of becoming, of your own gifts and strengths, versus dreaming it's from your song lines. It was planted in your spirit. It's your ancestors calling you to continue on their work. It's something so much bigger than ourselves. So we're going to yarn about dreaming, calling versus purpose through the principles of dreaming and mana, and using my own story to kind of unpack what this means and what the journey has been. Because First Nations cultures, there is so much to teach us. And there is so much reciprocity and strength and power in First Nations cultures, Indigenous cultures the world over. And for those that still stand strong in their teachings, and those that are fighting to reclaim what was taken from them through colonial and patriarchal genocide and trying to wipe us out and assimilate us, I acknowledge you, because what you are doing is so important. You are doing the work that many couldn't and that many chose to do, and you're picking up where they left off, because our ancestors didn't bring us this far for us to stay here. And what our Indigenous cultures as a collective perspective teach us is that our journey is not one in isolation. We are a part of an ecosystem. We are part of a collective, versus Western culture and patriarchal cultures teach us that we are individuals, to only focus on, it's very individualized. It's what does the individual want? Fuck what other people think and all this sort of stuff. But we do not exist in isolation. And there's another concept that I'd like to mention here that It helps me understand my own Indigenous practices and principles, which I grew up being Indigenous, but I didn't necessarily grow up being taught our practices and principles because my community only had so much knowledge to give and to share. And now I'm on this journey of learning more and indigenizing myself as much as I can. And I have a very beautiful friend, Tira Lillian Kakuvi, who alongside myself and Gemma Saunders, we founded the Becoming Better Together Collective. And we wove together queer culture, Indigenous culture, and Kenyan culture. And we took key principles. I took yarning and dreaming and storytelling. Gemma bought Kiki from the queer culture, and Lillian gifted us Harambe. And we weave these concepts together to help organizations and leaders create cultures of belonging and respect, founded in ancient principles and practices. And we wove together our cultures and our stories because we believe there was a better way of creating cultures of belonging and respect and doing diversity, equity, and inclusion for corporate organizations and leaders. And to my understanding of Harambe, a Kenyan concept of collective purpose and individual contribution, is that it's about the individual ensuring that they are contributing what they have from who they are and where they are to the collective to ensure that the collective can fulfill its purpose. And this is so important because when we feel like we have meaning and we feel like we are contributing to something bigger than ourselves, it allows us to do the work of meeting our responsibilities and our potential. It allows us to overcome the challenges that can be in front of us where we look at the world and when we feel like our life doesn't have purpose or meaning, this is where disconnection can happen. This is where we can desensitize ourselves to violence, to responsibility. We can switch off and start to numb ourselves and start to go on autopilot. And our life has no meaning. We don't take responsibility for who we're being and how we're showing up in the world. I know this from experience, is that when I was in the depths of my postpartum psychosis, I didn't believe I was worth fighting for. I didn't believe I had what it took to get better and to face the darkness and how heavy things were. It wasn't until my illness, my postpartum psychosis, took me to the point where I hurt my daughter and I tried to take my own life, and I realized that who I was being was hurting my children. And that went against my core principle and purpose of who I was as a mother, is that I wanted to ensure that who I was being as a mother was that my children were beneficiaries and not collateral damage. I didn't want my kids to become victims of my trauma and dysfunction because I wasn't willing to get up and take responsibility to heal my trauma and dysfunction so that I could become the mother that my children needed and that I could be. And not just the mother that they needed, but the mother that I wanted to be. So it wasn't until I found a purpose that was bigger than myself and I had someone worth fighting for, and then through that I started to believe that I was worth fighting for, that I was able to get up and do the work of going from postpartum psychosis to a woman who could be there for her children. And I also went from suicide to world champion through that journey. So this is where these concepts play out, is that my individual contribution needed to meet the collective purpose of my family at the time, which was to ensure that they had a mother who could be there for them, a mother who could be safe for them to be around. But also I wanted to be grounded in myself as a mother in a way that honored who I was, but also in a way that allowed me to show up and love my children in a way that I believed that they deserved. And Indigenous teachings teach us that we are not in isolation, that we are woven into the past, the present, and the future, that who we are needs to honour those who came before. It needs to strengthen those who stand with us, and it needs to resource those who are to come. And it isn't about trying to rescue the world. It isn't about trying to be everything to everyone, and being in service to others is not about abandoning the self or sacrificing yourself to meet the needs of others to the detriment of your own health and well-being. Like I heard a saying recently that was really beautifully said, don't give the shirt off your own back unless you have the capacity to replace it. This is about sustainable service, self-sustaining service. So there's an Indigenous concept, a Barkindji concept called Wapanya, which means to keep giving back. And Wapanya, in order to be able to keep giving back to others, is that the source needs to be self-sustaining. It needs to be a continuous source so that the giving can be from a healthy place, not a detrimental place. So that if there's an over-giving from the source, then it means that the source could potentially die or become polluted. And looking to country for answers, looking to country for teachings, is that if the river continues to flood itself too far that it isn't self-sustaining in its flow, then the river becomes no more. A tree has to first take what it needs from the ground before it can become a tree, before it can provide shade for others. It has to first take the nutrients from country before it can produce fruit. And depending on where it's planted and how it's nurtured and how it takes from country will determine the quality of the fruit that it is able to bear. And this is the idea of Wapanya, is that in order to be able to meet Harambe, my individual contribution to the collective purpose, I need to ensure that I am sustainable, that I am well, and that I only give from what I have to give. It's about giving what I have from where I am and who I am in a way that meets my obligations and the potential, but without burning myself out, because then sometimes we can give more than what we have, and that can be detrimental to the long term. And in this, we carry the wisdom of our ancestors and the responsibility to honor and weave all of this into the foundations of who we are. And it's not just dreaming, and purpose and calling isn't just ours alone. It is something that we have been entrusted with. It is something that we are gifted. And it's also a choice. We don't have to accept the calling on our life. We don't have to accept the journey of becoming, of having a purpose. I guess it's just determining what you want in your own life, what is worth showing up for, who is worth showing up for. And the thing is that our dreaming is not just ours, it's something that we're entrusted with. And mana is not just given, it's grown through action, integrity, and service. And I want to share these with you in a way that allows you to kind of understand. So purpose for me in my life right now is about becoming more of myself. This is my life's work, is to understand who I am, my gifts and my strengths, and allow myself to show up from that place, to let go of all that doesn't serve that as the foundation for how I live my life, and to serve from a place of my own well-being and the practice of and the principle of Wapanya, to ensure that my love for my children is self-sustaining because I've given myself enough love, that I'm first leading myself before I try to lead others. And that is my purpose, is that in being myself, I allow others to be themselves. And it's not about how other people receive who I am. If I'm coming from my truth, my power, and my love, the warrior heart, and it's not received by others, that's their journey. I'm going to let them be themselves. And I've learned this journey the hard way. When I've loved people for who I wanted them to be rather than who they are, I've dishonored them and I've dishonored myself, because I've set us both up to fail. Because I'm trying to force someone to be someone that they don't want to be. Even if I see their power and their potential and I'm like, if they just did this thing, or if I just create space for them, they'll become the best version of themselves. But do they want to be the best version of themselves? Is that what they see for themselves? And I've realized that I've hurt people that I love, and I've hurt myself because I've held on to a version of myself in that relationship and a version of that person in our life that didn't exist, because I was living for a version that they didn't want to be and that didn't exist in who we were together. And that in trying to be the version of myself that fit in with them, I was abandoning myself. And now in this season at 41, my work, my purpose is to be myself in the world, to be the most powerful, grounded version of myself in the world, so that this is how I live my life. I'm living and thriving from this place of self-acceptance, of being the boldest, bravest version of myself without apology, because I know what it is to abandon myself. I know what it is to be told I'm not enough, that I'm too much, that I'm not allowed, or that it's not safe to be myself in the world or in that relationship or in that space. And the cost of that is no longer one I'm willing to pay. So my journey, my work, my purpose in this season is to become more of myself, is to understand who am I under the trauma and the ego and the conditioning, and how do I allow that to be how I move through the world. And the calling is something that compels you, you can't ignore it. A calling is, and it could be something that's happening in a moment where you feel that compulsion to speak up. Your whole body is like, yeah, even though you may not want to, it's like, no, I have to say something here in a conversation, in a space. Or you are called to do something in the world that you may not necessarily be the beneficiary of, that you know that this thing has to exist in the world. Nelson Mandela would have felt that his calling was to end apartheid and to be an example of peaceful resolution. He was so committed to his calling that he spent 27 years in a prison. He sacrificed, gifted the world 27 years of his life. And when he came out, he didn't come out from an angry place. He came out from a place of wanting to heal and change the world by being a bridge, by speaking truth. Martin Luther King had a dream. He had a calling. Kathy Freeman had a calling to bring together the worlds when she carried the Aboriginal flag and the Australian flag together. And for me, my calling is Kililana. It's a space, it's a movement, it's a principle, it's a practice of creating a space and a program that allows First Nations women and youth to be themselves, to remember and reclaim who they were before the trauma and the colonial narrative told us who we could be. It's to create a space for them to connect with their truth. And who are they? The purpose of Kililana is to allow people to become themselves, to find their mana, their purpose. And if they find a calling, amazing. But to allow the calling to be grounded in who they are. And a calling is what pulls your spirit. It's the voice of country. It's the urgency in a moment. It's what hurts you in the world, what's causing you pain. What, if you looked at it, you could not imagine the world not having this thing, that you are willing to get up and fight for it, even if you are not a beneficiary of what this thing is. Versus your purpose is just the foundations of who you are. It is the weaving together of your truth, your strengths and your gifts, and you have the courage to develop that in a way that's how you move through the world. And a calling is something that you do, whether for a lifetime or a season. And it's in the Māori way, it is the whispers of your tapanya, the need for something to exist, even if you do not benefit for it. And the purpose is the foundation, the deeper why behind your actions. The roots that keep you grounded as you move through life. One is the fire and one is the earth. We need both. Is some of the notes that I took when I was exploring what this means, and the sacred path of dreaming and mana, and the journey of understanding yourself, your purpose and your calling. And I felt so compelled to share this because I've been on this journey of going, well, how does my calling serve my purpose? And how do I do both in a way that they honor each other? So going back to Kililana was founded in my spirit at the age of 15, when I knew that I wanted to create spaces for others like me, other Aboriginal youth and girls that were told that they weren't allowed to be themselves, that when they were being themselves, they were told they were too much or not enough, or that they didn't fit in, or that in some instances it wasn't safe to be themselves. They weren't allowed to be themselves. And I wanted to create a space where our behavior was seen as a way of communicating what we were going through, that underneath our behavior was sometimes a deeper driver of either pain or purpose, a way of understanding and moving through the world. So Kililana has been a calling. Jiu-jitsu is a part of my purpose. It's a part of what shapes me and is me. But the journey to becoming a world champion, and now my journey to becoming a black belt world champion, is a calling. It's a compulsion. And in the journey of becoming a world champion, I'm creating stories and experiences that allow me to step into my gift of wanting to empower other people, of wanting to see other people coming home to themselves, of belonging themselves. These are how the dreams, the purpose, and the callings are weaving together. Warrior Heart is a calling. It's a calling. It's a movement to awaken people to their own belonging, to their own power and potential, and understanding that there's going to be a fight ahead to be themselves in the world. And that when you have a calling that is bigger than yourself, it is worth it. You will find a way through by being anchored in that space. So with some of the notes that I've written, because these are very deep principles and practices, is that in First Nations culture, dreaming is more than just a vision. It's our dreaming is our spirituality. It's the way we are guided to our path in the world, but it is grounded in who we are. It's an ancestral blueprint that we walk within, and it's not something that we own, but it's something that we are woven into. It's something that we were already born with. It was something that was already planted in the wombs of our ancestors before we came here. But through social conditioning, experiences, and trauma, we're sometimes taken away from that. And then it's only when we get so sick of our own bullshit or the life that we're leading that is not our own that we start to break the mold. We start to challenge who we've been, because we know that who we're being isn't who we really are. And it's only when you have a compulsion, or the pain of being or the pain of not being is stronger than your comfort zone, is stronger than your fears, and is stronger than the hold of your conditioning and your trauma, that you really start to see people wake up to this. And that's why I created the school community, Warrior Heart community, is because I wanted to create a community and a space around people who are already on the journey and further ahead, or people who are beginning the journey, to come together, because being yourself in the world can be really scary. It can be dangerous, and it can be really hard. So I wanted to create a space where we can share this journey. We can learn from each other. We can share our teachings, and where we can just be ourselves. Almost like how jiu-jitsu is my sacred space for this. It's my sacred space for being and becoming. I wanted to gift that experience to others through creating an online community. And it's a gifted community, so it's free. And I know the need for that space, because I'm out here gifting myself to so many. The roles and responsibilities that I hold, the work that I do, serve so many people. I'm like, well, where's the space where I can go to reflect, to be, to fill myself up, to be with others in community and learning, so that when I step into roles where I'm guiding, teaching, or leading others, I'm doing so from a place where I've already led and guided and taught myself and been with others in a similar space. And our dreaming is both a gift and a responsibility. It calls for us to listen and to act and honor the legacy that we're called to. And we have to accept it. We have to go, yes, I'm going to take this. It's not that it's forced upon us. It's a calling, it's a responsibility, but not everyone accepts the calling. Not everyone accepts what it's going to take to be themselves beyond the trauma and the social conditioning of what other people have told them, or what they believe life has shown them of who they're allowed to be and what they're willing to do. It's about waking up. It's about getting out of numbing. It's about getting out of victimizing ourselves and avoiding doing what it takes. And it's about getting off of autopilot. It's about waking up and being willing to actualize our gifts before we can get to the point where we can alchemize and amplify them into the world in a way that they serve and benefit others. I need to do the work of becoming and being myself before I can then be there for others. But sometimes in the being there for others, that's when I become. It's all a thing. And for Māori, mana is the spiritual authority and power carried within us, passed down through the wakapapa, our ancestry. Strengthened by our actions and held in the way we serve our people. Mana is earned, not taken. It grows through how we show up in the world, how we honour our tupana, our ancestors, and how we uphold our responsibilities to the whānau, family, the hapu, the sub-tribe, and the iwi, the tribe. And how do you find a way to honor both in alignment with your dreaming and your calling. And just for reiteration, a calling is the pull towards something bigger than ourselves, something that it must exist whether we benefit from it or not. And a purpose is the deeper why, the foundation that keeps us aligned as we walk our path. Both are sacred and both must be held with care. Now let's step into this yarn as we go a little bit deeper, because it's how do you understand this? Your purpose whispers to you. It's when you're out of alignment to yourself. Your purpose is when you ignore those little pulls within yourself, of when you are causing yourself pain because you're ignoring who you are. You're ignoring the signs from your body and your spirit that tells you to go this way, and you're going against your own natural self. The Western thing is like, go against the grain and go your own path, but it's about coming home to yourself. It's about when you find that peace, that resonance, and it doesn't always shout, it whispers to you. Do you have the capacity and the practice to be still enough with yourself that your life and your spirit can speak to you? And a calling is, when you feel so compelled to do something, like I did with Kilana. Kilana wasn't something that I chose, it chose me. When I became so frustrated in my community so in its first iteration, Kilana was founded in my spirit when I was 15, when I knew that I wanted to create spaces for young people who were like me. First Nations girls, people with big dreams and big hearts who were told or shown it wasn't safe to be themselves in the world. They were told they were too much or not enough, or that they weren't allowed to be themselves, or it wasn't safe. And they had that confirmed through experiences. And then again at 23, when I started jiu-jitsu and I was doing the thing and I was being a mum, I wanted to give what I was learning back to others. I wanted to share my story so others could see themselves in my story. So I started a holiday program in partnership with a local organisation, that when I was home in community, I was running a holiday program for kids where we would have a feed, we would do some jiu-jitsu, and we would share stories. And then when the kids would share what was going on for them, we could offer some experiences or some guidance. And then it evolved in 2020 when I moved back to Mildura, Lachi country during COVID. And I got so frustrated at the lack of open youth spaces and spaces for young women and our women to come together, grounded in culture, grounded in purpose and meaning, that was away from crisis and case management response, that was away from that trauma narrative of going, I need a space to get away from these things rather than a space to come to things. And that's when I started an after-school program for girls while I was pregnant with my son and working full-time. Like, this space was basically a version of what I'd had growing up, and I wanted to give that back to the community. But it was also a space that I wanted to give to my daughters and to my children and my grandchildren, where we were free to be proud, staunch Indigenous women. And if we weren't that, it was a space where we could become that. And it has evolved over the last 5 years. It is still something that I am called to do, even though I'm ready to walk away from it. But I know that I can't walk away from this. My time isn't done until Kilana is self-sustaining beyond me as an individual. But it's about, how does this calling weave together with my purpose and honors my well-being and my roles and responsibilities? This is my journey. This is my season of understanding, of creating the roadmap, the strategy, the business plan for these things to be possible in a way that they weave together, but also start to become bigger than me. We start to create community and ecosystems around these callings, so that I'm the one who may have started them. I'm the one who may have been given the call to be the ancestral mandate that this is your thing to do. But now I'm in the season where they need to become bigger than myself. That it's about bringing other people into the vision and the ecosystem so that the dream can start to become self-sustaining wapanya. It can keep giving back because it is self-sustaining beyond an individual and beyond one thing. So your calling can find you through country and the whispers of your ancestors, the pull towards something that it must exist. And you were gifted that calling because only you can do that thing in that way. My beautiful, the two movies that I love the most, or 4 movies that I love the most that kind of describe my journey through this, is Coach Carter. Coach Carter is who I would be in how he goes through the journey of being the basketball player, and he's not there to be friends with these boys. Basketball is the vehicle to give them a dream and a purpose beyond what society was allowing for them and what they thought they even themselves were allowed to have. And beyond that one season, he wanted to set these young men to have a life up beyond the deficit narrative of going to jail and beyond the narrative of just being a successful high school athlete. What was beyond that? And to do that, he went against the grain. He went against society. And he was trying to give these boys the realization that they had more power and purpose than just being a high school athlete. But that came with responsibility as well. Harriet Tubman, the journey of Harriet, who was an Underground Railway woman who transported slaves during the slavery movement in the ending of slavery in America history. Her story speaks to me. Madam C.J. Walker became one of the first black women millionaires. Kung Fu Panda, the journey of Kung Fu Panda being the chosen one, even though on the outside his physicality, everyone else had trained for this, but he was called to this. He was chosen for this, even though he didn't believe himself. Moana. So these are the 5 movies that are kind of helping me make sense of my journey and understand it and share it. And the dreaming is that they're placed in your hearts by your ancestors and carried in your bloodlines and woven into your story. It's who you are. It's who you were born to be. For me, I was born to be a storyteller. I was born a warrior. I was chosen to be the bridge between the ancestors and the emerging. I'm the first in 2 or 3 generations in my family to practice and share culture, to my knowledge. My mum never shared culture with me. My nan never shared culture with me. So I went on this journey. So other people shared culture with me, but directly from my mum and my nan, that didn't happen. But it happened through my aunties and my stepmums. And I understood that I was called to not just be a bridge between the ancestral and now, but it was also to be a person who was brave enough to evolve culture through my own lived experience and understanding of how do I weave culture and indigenize myself in a way that honors the reality of living in the 21st century as a First Nations woman, and what does that mean? That is my purpose. That is my dreaming, is to be myself as a proud First Nations woman, as a warrior who was heart-led and ancestrally guided and culturally grounded through being a mother and being an auntie as the core roles that define how I show up in the world and how I serve, and through a story worth telling, a story where someone else can see themselves in my story and go, well, if Shantelle or Auntie Shang can, then I can too. That is my purpose. And it's about re-indigenizing myself. It's about remembering who I am beyond the colonial and patriarchal narratives and the trauma experiences that I've had that try to define who I am and who I'm allowed to be. It's about the fact that in this season, I refuse to prostitute my trauma or my power through a colonial and patriarchal lens. And mana strengthens the calling when we stand in our truth and honour our responsibilities. Our mana grows and we are given the strength to answer our calling. So my understanding of mana is that it is about developing your gifts. It's about coming home to yourself and developing from a place of your truth and your gifts and allowing that to be the way that you serve the world. And that the more you become yourself, the more you fulfill your power and your potential. That is the most sacred way of honouring your ancestors, those that are with you in this journey and those that you will create a legacy for, is that by becoming yourself and developing in your gifts and your strengths and doing only what you are here to do is the most powerful way to serve and honour not just your ancestors and now, but to create resources for generations to come. And the calling is something that cannot be ignored. It's a cause we fight for, the purpose. It's the thing that wakes you up at night, the thing that just will not leave your soul and your spirit. And you know that you would not be satisfied with life. Your soul and your spirit are not at peace if you don't do that thing. Knowing that that's the role you have to play in the world, either in your lifetime or in that season or in that moment. And it's like a feeling, a need to protect something or being drawn to create, heal, lead, or teach, even when it's difficult. Knowing that something must exist in the world, whether or not you benefit from it. And even if you don't know how to do it, you know that you're willing to figure it out along the way, or trusting that you will be shown how to do that thing. And that your calling is a whisper from your dreaming, a pull from your ancestors, and a force bigger than you. And to question yourself, to question your worthiness, is to dishonor and disrespect your ancestors. This is something I know to be true, is that every time I go, am I worthy of this? Am I allowed to be this? I dishonor my ancestors and disrespect them and think like they chose me for this, so they must know, right? Even though my humanity and my mind might not, but in my spirit I know that this is true, that I am meant for this. It's not about being worthy. I am meant for this because I was called for this. And the most powerful way I can fulfill these callings is by fulfilling my purpose, my mana, of becoming myself and allowing myself to be guided by my life and my ancestors. And it becomes an anchor of your identity in your service. Your purpose is how you show up and become yourself so that you can fulfill the callings. And your purpose is your why. It's what drives you. It's what gets you out of bed. But your calling is what pulls you in a moment towards a specific thing. So I hope that you're getting from this. And your purpose becomes your anchor. It becomes, this is who I am and this is how I show up in the world. When you're in your truth, there's a certain level of peace and anchoring that no matter what storm comes, when you know who you are and you can move through the world grounded in who you are and as you are, it allows you to find refuge and safety and an anchor through all the storms of life. It doesn't mean that life won't hurt. It doesn't mean that you won't struggle. But it also doesn't mean that everything has to be hard or that you need to suffer to be worthy. It just means that when you struggle in life or in your calling, you can come back to that truth. You can come back to who you are, and that elements of that won't change. And you do not exist in isolation. Like, your purpose is intertwined with others around you. So how do those meet and service each other? So some questions that you can ask yourself if you want to know more is like, why do you feel called to this path? What legacy do you want to leave? How do you serve in a way that strengthens your mana and uplifts others? How do you create service and beneficiaries to others while honoring your own well-being and capacity to give back? Because here's the thing, our calling is not meant to deplete us. Our calling is not meant to be something that we're not capable of doing. Might not be something that we don't know how to do yet. But if you are finding blocks, or you are finding that doing that thing or being that person is depleting you, and it is doing you more harm than good, then you are not connected in the right path. Because when we are connected to our dreaming and to our mana, our purpose and our calling, we don't need an energy source. It becomes its own energy source. It becomes its own flow. We are guided. We don't need all the ancestors. We don't need all the answers. We need our ancestors. We don't need all the answers. And when you are in service of your own purpose and calling, it strengthens you, it resources you. It might stretch you in order to grow. It might challenge you, and it might cause you pain, but that pain serves a purpose in preparation. What you're going through is the thing you need to go through to become who you're meant to. It's not meant to wipe you out. It's meant to shape you and allow you to become. So that's how you differentiate. When you're on your path, there's a difference between being in pain and suffering. Sometimes that pain is in service of becoming who you need to be, to not only do the calling, but to be able to hold and carry the calling from yourself in your life. And it's about integrity. It's about not just habits. It's about who you're being. It's not something that you do. It becomes who you are. And your purpose becomes the foundations for your calling. It becomes the foundation for your life. And when you're in alignment with that, everything else falls away. The truth speaks at a soul level. Your path unfolds. And sometimes who you're meant to be can only become clear when you're willing to sit with yourself and look at your life, reflect, but also take action. And some of the questions you can ask yourself is, what gives me energy versus what takes my energy? What feels easy for me to do in the world? What is it something, because you've got zones of genius. There's so many different ways to find your gifts and your strengths, but it's about sitting with yourself and go, what have I done that's always come easy to me? What experiences do I have? There's you can look at Ikigai, which is the Japanese concept of purpose, and it's mission, passion, mission, profession, and love. Like, what do you love? What is your mission? What can you get paid for? And what are you a professional at? You've got Teterai Trent, who her book Awakened Woman is a book about sacred purpose for women, and she talks about finding your purpose through what causes you pain, what can you not see yourself not doing in the world, and what are you already being called to do? Like, where is your life calling you? These are different ways that you can find purpose, and sometimes your purpose becomes clear through action and commitment. And when you're willing to do the work of becoming more of yourself and taking responsibility to know when you're not living in alignment with your truth, and you're not doing the things you need to do to lay the foundations to be yourself in the world in a way that is sustainable, like your health and well-being, becoming the person that you know can sustain the life. And if you'd like to know more about communities that can serve that, check out Patrice Washington, whose Community Redefining Wealth is really powerful, and she talks about the 6 pillars of wealth, that your well-being is the foundations of your wealth. Her work is really powerful, and she has a really powerful activated community around the 6 pillars of wealth, being relationships, health, money. There's 6 pillars anyway. So go check out those resources, because they are like, and then it's how do we weave our own self-development into our path to fulfill a calling, to be building something that is bigger than ourselves? How do we walk the path of getting to know ourselves? For me, it's through creating acts of ceremony. So in the morning, it's taking a quiet, deep breath to check in with myself, to ground myself in purpose and dreaming, to remind myself of why I'm getting out of bed, even on the days that I don't feel like it. It's for my children. It's for all those who couldn't do what I can do, who couldn't be what I could be because they didn't have the opportunity or they didn't have the capacity to step into their mana, to their power and their gifts, because it was either the season that they were in or who they were in. And it's for all those who still have the power and the potential, but they're looking for permission. They're looking for a pathway. This is what compels me to get out of bed and be myself in the world, to do this podcast, to share it with others, is that I want others to give themselves permission to know that they are already worthy, and that if they have a dream or a calling, that it chose them for a reason, that everything they have is everything that they need to move forward towards that. And as we say yes to our callings and our dreamings, we will be resourced with everything that we need. We don't need to force anything. In Indigenous concepts and practices, we don't force. We allow, we do the work and we create space, but we also accept that it's an act of co-creation. Our responsibility is to show up and do what we can, and then life and the universe will meet us. We will be guided. Remember, we are not alone in this journey. And it's not just that I have the solutions for the world. It's when you are called to serve, you can do so because you've done the work of developing your mana, your inner spirit, your inner gifts, your inner strength. That is my purpose, is to become myself and be myself, so that when I am called to something, I can fulfill that calling because I've lived in my purpose. I've done my work. And a calling asks us to move. Purpose keeps us steady. Dreaming calls us forward, but mana gives us the strength to hold it. So your dreaming and your calling compels you forward, but are you the person who can hold the dreaming? Do you have the mana within yourself to fulfill the responsibility and the power and the potential of what this means? So money is doing the inner work of becoming who you need to be so that when you are called, you can not only do the thing, but you can hold it and amplify it into the world in such a way that it doesn't just honor now, but it services generations to come. And you can have multiple callings within a lifetime. Your purpose can fulfill multiple, who you are can fulfill multiple callings, multiple roles and responsibilities. But remember, if it is breaking you, if it is hurting you to be that person or to fulfill that calling, it might not be the calling, it might be the way that you're going about it. It might be the way that you are doing the work, that you are holding on, you're holding on to a version of how that thing's meant to unfold, rather than going, I accept the vision, I have a plan, but I'm not attached to how I get there. I'm just using the plan, but the plan is flexible. It is fluid. It can be responsive to what's going on, not reactive. And understanding the difference allows you to have clarity. It allows you to show up in your world in a way that is meaningful and sustainable. Your calling is the fire and your purpose are the roots. Together they create something unshakable. And further into my notes and my research into this, is some of the questions that came up from my spirit was, how are you embracing both purpose and calling, and how you embrace both shapes your personal and cultural journey. And the impact of recognizing when a calling has served its season and when to shift on. Now, this one's really important, is having the humility to know when you are no longer called to serve that calling. When it has grown beyond you, when you have served your role, when you have fulfilled your part in the calling, and it is time to let it go. Because sometimes we are not meant to lead anymore. Sometimes we're only called to lead for a service or a moment or a part. And then we have to have the humility and the responsibility to know when we are no longer in service of the calling, that we are doing more harm than good by holding on to things that are no longer ours. When we have outgrown roles, or we have evolved beyond, or the role is more than we have the capacity to fulfill because we are called to go in a different direction. When you can no longer, with integrity, and that fulfilling that role and that responsibility is doing more harm than good, either to yourself or you are doing harm to the role and to the vision because you're holding on to something that is no longer yours to hold on to, or that you are no longer called to walk that path. Sometimes our dreams and our seasons evolve, and sometimes it takes us in directions that we would never imagine that we'd go. This is when we let go of the ego concept of who we are, and we accept that sometimes we are going to become someone that we've never met before, because the calling and even our purpose, our mana, guides us, trusting in our ancestors to hold us as the net, and that our dreaming will guide us, and that our culture and who we are at our core will hold us grounded through that. So do you have something that is calling you? Do you feel like you are in alignment with who you are? Do you feel like you are in your truth? If you want more of this, this is where the Warrior Heart can serve you. Come and check out our community on School. I'll put it in the notes below. Share this episode with someone that you know has been struggling with finding a purpose in life. Because I know the danger of not having a purpose and a meaning, and not feeling like our life means something, or who we are as a person is worthy of meaning something. It can literally kill us. And sometimes it can mean that we do more harm than good to those that we love when we are in denial or avoidance or fear, or away from our truth and our calling. It can do way more harm than good. So, and how does your purpose align with your ancestors, with your family and your community? How does who you're being in the world service something bigger than yourself and those that you love? Maybe not even in this season, they may not understand now, but you trust that what you are, who you are called to be, and who you are becoming is in service of something bigger than even you can understand. And it can sometimes mean having the courage to walk alone as well, because sometimes by stepping into our purpose and becoming ourselves, we must go out alone because others cannot see what we can see. They're not meant to. This was for you alone. It doesn't mean that you're alone. It just might mean that the journey might be lonely because those that you expect to understand don't, because they're either not called to where you're meant to go, or they're not willing to do the work of showing up for their own journeys. And sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is to leave people where they are. It is not our job to carry people when they're not willing to carry themselves. And what strengthens your mana? What activates you? What sets your heart on fire? What gives you energy? and what depletes it, because these are all signs of how you can find your purpose and your calling. And when we have the courage to do more of what we love, what sets our hearts and our spirits on fire, that's how we give from Wapanya, to keep giving of service. Women Jekka, what is your purpose for being here? The Diri, practicing deep listening and ceremony, creating ceremony in your day, to rest, to listen, to slow down enough so that your life and your spirit and your calling can speak to you so that you can be guided. So this week, take one action towards finding clarity in your own purpose, in your own becoming, and a calling that you might have on your life. And sometimes we don't have a calling. Not every season has a calling. Sometimes we're just meant to exist as we are, and that is okay. We're in flow until we are called. So you can start some journaling with prompts of, my purpose is to, I feel called to, the impact I want to create is, my mana is strengthened by, my mana is depleted by. So for example, one of mine came up is, my purpose is to uplift and empower my people through role modeling and storytelling, leadership and cultural sovereignty. I feel called to protect our dreaming, strengthen our communities, and honor the wisdom of my ancestors. The impact I want to create in the world is where we walk in our mana unapologetically and boldly. The warrior heart is to stand in your power, be your truth, and follow your heart. But in order to be able to create Kilana or the warrior heart for others, I need to be able to gift that through who I am. And that's one of the most powerful things you can gift those that you love, is by being yourself. So in saying all this is, what's next? Like, where are you going to go with this? And how do you understand your calling and your purpose? Because remember, your dreaming is your story. It's the map. It's the spiritual blueprint that exists in you. It was already there. Your calling can be seeded from your dreaming. Sometimes the calling is from you wanting to gift others previous versions of what you didn't have. And it's seeded from your own experience. From people that I've watched, their callings that become bigger than themselves were seeded in their own life experience. So get curious, look back on your life and go, what would I wanted to have given a previous version of myself? What would they have needed in a way that would have unlocked their power and their potential? Where do I feel like I was held back? I yearned for something that I couldn't give. When you look at the people in your life, where do they stand? Where do they sit? Where do you feel pulled and called? Because a calling is something that won't let you go. It's something that just whispers to you and it never leaves you alone. And that can be your purpose as well when you're not in alignment. And the thing is that your calling and your capacity to fulfill your calling can grow through you stepping into your purpose and your mana and doing the work of becoming yourself. I keep repeating that, but that is so important. So, and how you step into this space is going to be so important, because a calling is a force of movement. It calls us forward even when we are uncertain in the path. Sometimes the most powerful way to step into a calling is to just look at it and go, what is the next most aligned step that I can take in a way that aligns with who I am and the season that I'm moving from? So a calling, like I said, a calling in this season for me is to accept that Kilana has grown bigger than me. It has grown bigger than my capacity to carry it. So my calling in this season to fulfill Kilana is to lay the foundations to bring other people in, is to lay the foundations for the dream to move beyond me, to become its own ecosystem, and to allow the dreaming to guide me, to ask Kilana, who do I need to be in this season to honor you? Who do I need to be to fulfill this calling? But also, what do you need from me? What do you want from me? And it's the same with the journey to black belt. It's asking these questions of the dreaming like it's its own entity, like it's its own being, and allowing it to guide me in how I show up. But doing so, grounding myself in my purpose of my mana, allowing my service to be grounded from the season of what I can do from where I am and who I am, because giving more than I am capable of will sometimes be more harmful than do more harm than good. And it's about leaning into the stretch. It's not about going into zones of suffering and pain where I break. It's about stretching myself. It's about leaning into the discomfort and knowing the difference between discomfort and pain. Pain injures us. Discomfort can grow us. And that's the calling that I have at the moment, is that Kirlana is meant to exist in the world, but it is bigger than me, and it is time for this to go. And in order to not lose myself in the calling, I need to anchor myself in who I am and the things that are important to me, that activate me, that I can service the calling in a way that lights me up. I don't have to do this in a preconceived way. Just because I've never ran a not-for-profit before doesn't mean I'm not capable of learning how to do it. And sometimes that is the greatest gift, in not knowing how to do something, because you don't know what's a mistake until it becomes a mistake. And sometimes the old ways of doing things are not always the best. So it's understanding when our ancestral ways are in service of the bigger picture, and when it's time to evolve our ways of being to meet the need of now, but also of the world that we're trying to grow. And a way to stay grounded in the troubles of the world is to know who you are, to know you're dreaming, and to be able to go to meet the moment for what it is, but using that moment to go, what am I building now for a future state of being? I can be in reality, I can be in the world as it is, whilst knowing that who I'm being is building a world towards something bigger that I want to gift to my children. I'm creating a life worthy of what I'm capable of living, whilst ensuring that who I'm being and the seeds that I'm planting create momentum and plant seeds for future generations to be beneficiaries of, that I will never reap the rewards of. And the thing is that your purpose is your foundation, your calling is your movement. One grounds you, the other propels you. And sometimes the clarity comes in the taking of action. And that's the thing, is like, where to from here? So your purpose, my purpose in this season, is to know who I am and who I'm becoming. Who was I always meant to be, and allow that to be the foundations of how I show up to fulfill my calling. My mana, what lights me up, my strengths and my gifts are the way forward. That is the way to be sustainable in the gift of service to others, is by serving from who I am and where I am, and trusting that in that showing up, it is enough. I don't need to carry everyone. I don't need to carry everything. And I do not need to sacrifice myself or burn myself out to honour the calling and the service, to honour my mana. That is not our Indigenous way. Our giving, wapanya, is self-sustaining. And when I take what I need from country in order to be able to give to others, that is the way. I hope this serves you in some way. I hope that you take the time to explore the difference between your purpose and your calling, your mana and your dreaming. If this has resonated with you in some way, please let me know. Share it with me. If you've gotten to this point, put mana and dreaming in the comments, because that allows me to reach more people. It allows me to know that you're listening. Hit the like and subscribe button, because that means I can reach more people. And come and check out my community over on School, and let's walk more of this warrior heart journey together. Big love you, mob.